Our next discussion is looking at films that are inspiring food systems transformation. I'd like to welcome our next speaker, starting with Maayan Laufer, the founder and festival director of Ceres Food Film Festival. Give her a round of applause. We have Matt Coddaire, the filmmaker behind From the Heartland. Round of applause with his flannel shirt. And we have Roshan Patel, a media producer with the Smithsonian Institution behind the film Café y Aves. Round of applause. All right, Maayan, before we dig into this conversation, I'm so happy to see you, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us and putting all this together.
No.
Been amazing.
It's my pleasure. You have a clip that you're going to share with us. Can you tell us a little bit about it before we see it?
Yeah, sure. It's really like a taste of the kind of content that we have at the festival. And it should feel like tasty and inspiring and intriguing and motivating. So that should give you an idea of what we hope you come away from when you attend our festival, virtually or in person.
Wonderful. Play the clip, please. Bigger, everyone. I know you're all drinking and eating, but this is a great clip. So you said the phrase tasting and inspiring, which is now my favorite phrase. And it's so important to create a hub for films like these that talk about food and agriculture. How do we get beyond the food, like people like me who watch food and agriculture films?
You mean beyond and into action?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's so many ways, but many of the films have built in them calls to action. Mm-hmm. So that's one wonderful way. Another way that is very important for us is that we have screenings which are very similar to what we're having here, which are coupled with food, and usually it's upcycled food, some beverages, and a panel on the topic of what we're watching. And part of what I think is important to create, which you're also creating here, is intimacy. So I think so much of what happens if you go to a cinema and it's very big and you have so many people there, you can, I think, more easily sort of avoid feeling a responsibility towards it. But when you're in a smaller group, I think it just hits you differently.
Yeah.
So that's very important to maintain that. And then really in selecting films that we feel can touch people universally, or, more or less.
Sure, sure.
The greatest concern that I have for the future of farming is not telling the story.
I want people to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it.
We're not perfect. We've got flaws, but we're doing everything we can to be the best stewards of the earth God's given us. And we're trying to do it through generations and generations of mentorship and passing it on. Because there's a lot of things in this world you can do without, but you can't do without food.
Okay, folks, we're gonna get started here in a little bit. The farm has a 91.
It is about agriculture here.
When farmers do well, Main Street does well. It has a really positive impact on community spirit, community events, community growth. But I've also seen the opposite, where if it's been a grim year and those jobs leave, it can spiral out of control really fast.
The equipment that we had then is very limited. What we knew about farming was very limited as well.
We did it the best we could, and it was all they knew back then, right?
You wonder what you should do different, but it's an act of nature, and sometimes it gets kind of extreme.
The real turning point was 2014. Massive amounts of large rains.
Very heavy rain. It is moving toward the northeast.
When you're tilling 8-10 inches deep, that's loose soil. It's gonna move.
And I was sick of watching dirt wash away.
Mother Nature kind of forced our hand.
It takes courage to be the guy that says, you know, I know we've been turning the earth black, but we're gonna try something different now.
What are we willing to risk to try something new?
That gives jobs in the community. That brings kids back home because now it's a little more exciting.
To bring a kid back to the farm, there has to be income. That's still a factor, right? You know, there's no guaranteed paycheck here.
What does Main Street look like when all these guys are done?
You gotta have the next generation to take it over. It's gonna stop. That's where it stops.
All right, guys, we're gonna sell this farm.
Did we really screw up? Did I just stop the fourth generation from coming back?
We want to stay a productive farming community, and saving our soil is the way to do it.
So powerful, Matt, really. And you know, on an earlier panel, we talked about this idea of not demonizing farmers, and I think that was very important to you in this film. But these floods were so damaging, and they caused farmers to change their practices. It was that damage from those floods, right?
Yeah, so as the trailer stated, in 2014 there was a pretty major flood that ran through the region. This town we shot it in was in southwest Minnesota, where they do grow a lot of corn and soy, mostly. And for the farms that were still using full conventional tillage, it eroded a lot of the land away and took the crop with it. And, you know, of course, the farm that we followed, they adapted their practices to try and protect themselves from that happening again.
Yeah.
And last summer it happened again.
Yeah.
Almost 10 years to the day. And it was giving me chills thinking about it, but they were sending me photos. And, you know, of course, my first question was like, how did your crop hold up?
Right.
And, you know, it stood up against these floods where their neighbors who were still, you know, using conventional practices did not.
Right. Yeah, that's very powerful that you can do that, you know, just changing the way things are done and seeing the impacts. And I wonder now that those floods have happened again, if those farmers using conventional tillage will change, but that's a question for another day. I want to turn to Roshan, and we have the trailer for your film, Café y Aves, to show. So can we play that now?
No me podría imaginar en mi vida otra cosa que cultivo el café, principalmente por el modo en que se hace aquí, que es bajo sombrío. Eso me apasiona, que sea con sombrío y que haya biodiversidad.
When coffee is grown sustainably, it provides spaces for all of those unique forms of life. Together, we can create a landscape that's providing spaces for all of the birds that live here.
Todos hacemos parte de la cadena. Desde el consumidor, desde esa persona, hasta el que la produce, estamos unidos.
Roshan, congratulations on this film. Who are you trying to reach with it?
That's a great question. One of the things that I'm most proud of with this film, it's a 15-minute short, is that Don Jorge, who's featured in the film, he actually uses the film to host coffee meetings with his other farmers, to gather people. So it's really promoting this value that is an innate value, more than the economic value, than a lot of the arguments and cases for making decisions, which are certainly important. But in the film, he's really someone who loves birds and he loves forests, and he's been able to figure out how to grow that on his farm. And so by having that, before we made the film, he sort of was telling me that he's seen as this like crazy bird person, and all the other coffee farmers would sort of laugh at him, that really respected the way that he farmed, but that aspect of him wasn't taken very seriously. And this has allowed him to be able to reach other farmers in his cluster, to be able to say, hey, if we start growing these trees, if we start doing, and very specific trees, it's this fig tree, it's this, inga tree, there's, it's not just having shade grown, it's how complex that is to be able to bring things back. He isn't now just a crazy bird person. There's something to it that's a little bit more tangible and more ideated than just someone who wants to see a bird.
Yeah, and this is something that both Matt and you are seeing. Farmers change practices because they see the impacts, they see the effects. That must be powerful for you as filmmakers to be able to tell that story and see the effects yourselves. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this From the Heartland was not made for like the people in this room. It was made for other farmers, really. And I've been getting messages from them and from the soil scientist that's featured in the film, talking about how the agriculture community, especially in the Midwest, has reacted to the film and is inspired by the film. And we spoke about it on the phone, but something that was really special to me was a story that Sean, who's featured in the film, shared about somebody reaching out to him and telling him that their farm has, been conventional tillage for decades, for generations, and after seeing the film, they decided to start introducing strip till and reduced tillage practices onto their farm.
It's really cool.
That's
really
why
cool.
we're doing it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great impact. Roshan.
Yeah, so one of the things that is featured a little bit more in the film is the research side of it, as it pairs with Don Jorge's sort of vision, and there are bird-friendly sort of practices that they're approaching, and so they're looking at, there's researchers who are studying which trees are being used throughout the year, and helping basically create a tree catalog that they're able to share amongst other farmers, both regionally but also within the whole country, to be able to say, these are trees that are, practical. And it's sort of still in development. And one of the things that's really exciting is that research question keeps expanding by the direction of the farmers.
Right.
So they're now wondering, okay, if some of these are going to eat coffee borer beetles, which one, so that we can sort of triage and say, if we're going to only plant one extra type of tree, which one is going to attract the one that's going to help my farm? So it's sort of this like natural fluid process, which is sometimes rare in the research side. I'm coming at this from, a lot of my films are about wildlife and conservation and not necessarily food, but obviously they intersect. So it's interesting to sort of see the wildlife community adapt their questions to what the farmers are hoping to address and be able to provide that tool.
That's very cool. Thank you for that. So this is for all three of you. We all know that the average age of farmers is rising around the world. It's about 60 years old here in the United States. It's about 60 years old in parts of sub-Saharan Africa. I'm wondering if you think creating these stories or highlighting these stories will help inspire young folks to become see agriculture as an opportunity. Maayan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot about, in terms of the films, it's a lot about the kind of exposure that they get, which is definitely an important part of our mission.
Sure.
So I know what happens often with, especially short films, which are the ideal length for young audiences. They might go through the festival circuit and maybe after that don't really have a targeted way of reaching people. So I think in that sense, having more of a direct avenue, like the festival, or whether it be through the Smithsonian, which Roshan's film is accessible that way, I think really helps reach out to those specific people, or to that younger generation.
Yeah.
And then in terms of making them actually choose farming, you know, you had the other film, Farming While Black, which was also one of the festival films, and it really is amazing.
Right.
It's just gorgeous. And I can see how, because there are young people in the film and you see them becoming farmers, and I imagine the same with your film, from the Green Bronx Machine, seeing your kind do that, and visual is just going to travel miles beyond what you can teach in words.
That's amazing. Roshan, do you want to go next?
Sure. I think, you know, one of the things that I really enjoy about the craft of filmmaking, I'm pretty much doing short form, is that it in some ways can be more, it gives you the option of being efficient. So like, to be transparent, this film was a very low budget thing. I shot it with no crew, and you just kind of figure these things out. And so it's sort of like this opportunity to be like, okay, if there's just enough money, you can just go out and do it. And so I think that there's like, it's changed what I think you can do with the form and storytelling, just because there are parts of it that are more accessible, but then, you know, to that point of being as a part of Smithsonian is like we have the ability to put it in museums and thinking about exhibit spaces, and, you know, I think it's one thing to create, but then you have to really think of where are people going and how do you sort of talk to them. You know, my family doesn't drink coffee, my parents and things like that, so a film like this doesn't necessarily directly connect, but I want, you know, those communities to also still be impacted by it. So it's sort of thinking about like food sourcing generally and tying these stories into it. And I think stories allow themselves to have a universal message, even if you don't directly relate to it. So in that way, I think that there's a lot of access points to.
Yeah, it keeps amplifying on itself. Matt?
Yeah, I think in our film, we kind of went into it with two goals, and one was, of course, to inspire other farmers, other conventional farmers, to start thinking about regenerative practices, you know, baby steps. The second part was to try and just open up the conversation a little bit, because I feel like so many times that these farmers get sort of thrown under the bus. And, you know, maybe the next generation doesn't want to be a part of it because they're the scapegoat, you know? And so, you know, if you get the chance to watch the film, like, we really try to bring personalities behind these fields and these farms and our food that we, you know, like, sure, we all want to subscribe to a CSA and we all want to, you know, eat sustainably grown food, but we're also eating junk food, we're also eating burgers and like all these other things. And so most of the food is still grown on farms like this, and if we can start respecting the people and the families that are on that land and taking care of that land, I think it'll maybe inspire the next generation to stick around a little bit. And
thank you for that. We have to respect farmers, and we have to give them, you know, the honor that they deserve. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, Maayan, go ahead.
I would just like to add to what Matt said, and that reminds me of the Farming While Black film, that what both films do is really show the family unit behind the farm, which speaks to your point about involving the younger generation, and I think that's very powerful to see.
It is very powerful. You're all very powerful people. I loved all of these films. Thank you so much. Round of applause for them, please.